2015. Sure what that was. After the big flood of 2015, it was flowing a lot. Everything was super charged up. We had a ton of rain, and it was actually flowing about 50 to 70 cubic feet per second when we were out there to measure. So it's just coming out like a big fire hose. And so it's kind of like an overflow. So when the aquifer is really, really full, it's got a lot of water in it. That's where all the water's coming out of that Miller Spring. Much more so even than Pleasant Valley Spring, which is downstream. It's really seems to be restricted by the gravel that it's covering up. So even though it's over the long term, it's the largest spring in the Middle Trinity Aquifer and it's providing the base flow to the Blanco River, it can only flow so much water because it's got all that gravel that's covering it. So since then, and one of the benefits of my job at the Edwards Aquifer Authority is I manage a big contract with the USGS, and I get to determine where we have stream gauges. And so over the last 5 or 6 years, we added a stream gauge upstream at Valley View Road and downstream. And so we can track what the flow of water is coming out of these springs. And so here's the last year upstream, Valley View, zero. It's zero. I don't know, Ed, would you say probably 80 to 90% of the time it's zero.
Last time it flowed there was October 21.
Right, and that was a short period of time, probably.
Less
So-
than a week.
Right. So most of the time it's zero flow there. And so what that means is when it's zero flow and we're measuring flow downstream, that means all the flow that we're measuring here is coming out of those springs. And if we were going to go out there today and make some a little more detailed observations, we'd see just a trickle coming out of Park Spring. And actually the river goes dry right through here. And then all the flow that's coming down through Wimberley is coming out of this one spot, Pleasant Valley Spring. And if you go to the USGS gauge, I went there this morning and the flow here is exactly the same as it was here in town. So really important for us to understand these springs so we can protect them in the future. All right, so let's talk about wells for the last few minutes of that. Got rush through all this stuff. So conceptually, we need to understand where our wells are in these hydrogeologic units. Are we in the Middle Trinity? Are we in the Upper Trinity? And we're in the Edwards if we're further to the east. These are what we call fault blocks. So each one of these kind of stair steps of the geologic layers is a fault block. So it's really important to know where you are with regards to faults, how deep the well is, and what units it has to go through. There's a diagram showing Pleasant Valley Spring and Jacobs Well in this upper fault block. This would be maybe between kind of where we are now and a little further east, and this is closer to San Marcos. This is Fern Bank Spring, Little Arkansas. If any of you remember back in the day when you could go to Little Arkansas and go swimming, and then San Marcos Springs, as Jenna showed earlier.
I didn't realize this for Edwards Springs.
San Marcos?
The Fern Bank.
It is. Fern Banks. Oh, hey, Nick. I didn't even realize you were here. He's back on us. Yes, so Fern Bank Spring, we done some dye tracing and it's coming out of the base of the Edwards.
Oh, okay.
The very top of the Glen Rose. So we use maps to understand. I remember I showed those cross sections early on in the presentation. I know it seems like years ago, right? But I had that water level surface. And so if we look at it in map views, not in a cross section view, we can look at these and it's just like a topographic map. It's exactly the same thing. So if you're familiar with how to look at the lines on a topographic map, that's what you're looking at here. And so you have areas of high water level elevations to the west and the northwest, and areas of low water level elevations to the southeast. These are all elevations that are in the Middle Trinity Aquifer. So the lower Glen Rose, Hensel, and Cow Creek. And so we can look at really interesting patterns. So here's the city of Blanco, Wimberley, where we are now, Pleasant Valley Spring, Jacobs Well Spring. And so you can see where the lines are very close together. That means that the gradient or the water table is changing very steeply, right? So it's going from higher elevation to lower elevation. So it's more like a steeper hill slope. In contrast to areas like this, it's very flat. So the water table is very flat. And if you notice, These flat areas are around where these big springs are, Jacob's Well, and that's because there's some big conduits. There's places where that water can go out and drain quickly, and so that's where you see kind of the flattening of the water table. But then you see just to the east, that water table steepens again, and that's because it's crossing through a fault zone. So it's going across those different faults that offset the different blocks. And those faults in this case are acting like barriers or pseudo barriers to flow. So they can isolate what's going on in the aquifer here versus what's going on in the same level of the aquifer a little further down. There's some really great resources on the Hayes Trinity webpage where they've gone through and done what they call synoptic surveys. So it's like a snapshot in time of the water table. You can find these reports on the Hayes Trinity webpage. This one was done 2021, I think, is when the data were collected, and this was in 2018. It was published by the Barton Springs Edwards Aquifer Conservation District, but it's also available on their webpage. So I'm going to have to really go through this quickly. We did a lot of work to understand how the aquifers and how they supply water to Jacob's Well, and provided information to advise the Hayes Trinity Groundwater Conservation District to establish a groundwater management zone Jacob's Well. So that's what we see here. This groundwater management zone in green, and they also established what's called a regional recharge study area that includes Pleasant Valley Spring to the west. We started off as a process that a lot of stakeholders were involved, a lot of back and forth. So we would present some scientific information. We would all discuss it as a group, and we were trying to come to some kind of agreement as to what would be an area that we would be protecting from Jacob's Well flow. So this is the first one, and we define these important areas, and I'll talk about those a little bit in the next couple of slides. So the fault zone, the watershed, and what we understand about where the water's coming from. So here are these three different areas: the fault zone. And remember our potentiometric surface map, the water levels higher to the west, to the east, so the water's coming in that direction. So we know that that's the area we need to protect, the upgradient or upstream area. Regional recharge area, running the Blanco River and Pleasant Valley Spring. And let's talk about these faulting areas a little bit and why they're different. So this is when we talk about water levels and wells and how they tell a different story. If we look at water levels that are in the up dip or uphill area, so up in this area, they behave very differently. You see how these water levels are very flat over time and respond rapidly to precipitation events. And then if we go down in this area, the water levels are much deeper, but they also have a very different pattern. So we can use this information to infer that there's some type of a separation between these two portions of the aquifer. So if we want to protect the area that's feeding Jacob's Well, we really want to focus on this area gradient. And in fact, if we look at this is a great example of wells directly affecting the flow of Jacob's Well. This is kind of a textbook example. There's a well, Aqua Wood Creek 21, which is right here near Jacob's Well Spring. This is a cycle of the water level in the well. When they turn the pump on, water level drops, turn the pump off, comes back up. And we see the same exact pattern in the flow of Jacob's Well. So when they turn the pump on at this well, the spring flow of Jacob's Well drops by about 1 CMS. And so there's another well, well 23, that when it's pumped, it also has some effect on the spring flow as well. So just showing that direct connection between the spring flow. I put this up here just to show you all the different users of the aquifer in this area. So Jacob's Well Spring, all the black dots are what we call exempt or probably residential wells. The triangles are permitted wells that are providing water either to Wood Creek or maybe some smaller CCNs or service areas in the western part of the county. But most of the extraction is occurring in this area right here, providing all the water to Wood Creek. Won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but let's just take a look at the different colors, right? So the blues Jacobs well flow here in January, early 2011. So if you guys remember 2011, it was pretty hot and dry. So it was, as we see spring flow decrease every month, we see pumping, which is shown here in red, increase. And when we get down to August and September, you can see almost all the extraction out of the aquifer is coming now from pumping and not from spring flow. So if we look at that a little bit differently, we can look at pumping, spring flow. And so these gray areas are drought periods. So you can see when spring flow drops, pumping increases. Here's another way of looking at it in 2011. Again, here's pumping and spring flow. So if pumping goes up, spring flow goes down. So the groundwater management zone was created to hopefully try to reduce pumping in these types of periods and increase spring flow.
Marcus, could you back up the slide?
I could.
Can we just assume that if there were no pumping at all, zero pumping,
Correct.
exempt or not exempt, that the blue would go up to the top of the yellow on the stretch?
That would be a safe assumption, I think. So if there was no pumping, so if there are no wells that have ever been drilled, all things equal, that spring flow would have maintained at about 2 CFS during 2011. Thank you.
But not all of those wells are in that influence zone, right, Marcus?
In this particular graph, they are.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is not pumping for the whole district.
Okay.
This is pumping just from the wells that are within the groundwater management zone. Right. So we, as part of the process of doing that analysis, we focused on wells and permanent pumping in that. So same on this graph as well.
Does that imply that spring flow drop and pumping increase, is that necessarily irrigation? Is it, can you draw a line in there?
Well, so when you talk about irrigation, are you talking about irrigation of lawns?
I was thinking, you know, I take the same amount of shower that I have drought.
Right, so right, and that's a safe assumption. I mean, we don't have any way of distinguishing between the usage of residential users. But you know, the amount of water that has to be provided and is used by water suppliers goes up in summer. And like I said, it's due to irrigation.
Water supply, they have a mean of looking at irrigation water.
Not
Oh,
separate.
we had 2 meters.
I think if they have people that have meters that are specifically used for irrigation, that they would have a separate use, but as far as a meter on a house, I'm not a customer of Wimberley water supply, but I used to be on a board of a big water supply corporation, and there was just 1 meter for each house, so there was no way to separate that. But that's what we infer, and that's what most municipalities. And I'm chewing into Charlie's time like something crazy right now, so just yeah, that's the assumption, right? That all these peaks are due to irrigation increases in water usage. Unless people are taking longer showers and doing a lot more dishes. I'm gonna zip through this pretty quickly. This is a more recent analysis that Robin did, actually looking at the periods that we are in different stages of drought. So as part of the groundwater management zone, what our technical committee recommended was what was now what exists is at 6 cubic feet per second. There's a 10% reduction. I think the 2 CFS that went off the table, so we're at 30 below 3. Charlie, is that correct? I think that's right.
In the zone, we're in 30.
Yeah.
30, right? So 3 is as low as it goes. So we did an analysis to determine how much period of, what period of time we would be in the drought. And Robin's done that analysis in a little bit more detail. This is the same graph on these two. This is just a normal scale and this is a logarithmic scale. So you can see when the flow gets below 1, which unfortunately it does a lot more often now. Here's a comparison to the Mount Baldy monitor well, which has been here for quite a long time. And there's a general decrease in the water level here. And you can see that the lows at Mount Baldy well correspond with the lows at Jacobs well. One of the things that's really sad is the number of Jacobs wells have been at 0 flow, 2022, 35, almost as much as 2009. So just to kind of wrap things up here, we use all this information in the springs of the different hydrogeologic layers, information from wells to understand how these systems work. And so as a well owner, right, you really need to know where your well's completed, what section of the aquifer are you in, in which fault block, how deep is it down to each of the different layers, different units. These different geological units might have different water quality. You might have very fresh water in some areas. It might have very high dissolved solids or lower water quality in other areas. So understanding that context is really important, and that's a function of how deep the well is and where you exist in this domain of the aquifer system. I think I'm going to wrap it up with that.
I had a quick question.
Yes.
Online. What website can someone visit to find a cross section near where they live to determine like where they're at in that geology?
Right. So there's not like a clearinghouse webpage that has it for any particular location.
Mhm.
So it's sometimes tricky.
Hydrogeologic atlas.
There are different sources of information. So all the cross sections that I showed here come from published reports. A lot of them from that groundwater management zone report, hydrogeologic atlas of Texas. So there's a number of them. But where that you already closed it down. So if you remember the map that I showed of cross section, and it had a line on it that was kind of the trace of where the cross section is. So if you live near one of those traces, you can get some pretty good information about that. The further you get away from where those cross sections were defined, the trickier it gets. So it's all a complex 3-dimensional puzzle that you kind of have to put back together. So just understanding how the system works reasonably, and contact those people to know. Contact Charlie. He'll put you in touch with somebody. You guys have my contact information. Robin, David, all these people. We like to share information with people who want to know. So
In the recap of this presentation or of this workshop, I'll share links with the hydrogeologic atlas and the evaluation. I'm making a list of all the things that I'm supposed to do. All right, and I'm going to hand these out. Hey, good job. While he's getting settled, would anybody like a copy of this with the stratigraphic column on it? And I think, so this was a publication from Charlie and Trinity ECD. So a lot of what he's going to talk about is in there.
Yeah, if it is, when I was younger. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you. A lot of familiar faces. I'm even more excited about the faces that I've not seen. That means we've got some new folks in the house. I would encourage everybody who comes to these functions regularly to, if you're at a cocktail party or at church and you're talking to somebody about groundwater and they have no idea what you're talking about, please bring them next time. The more people we have here who've never heard any of this information before, the better. I'm going to go over the Hayes Trinity Groundwater District's touch points with the watershed protection plan and the Cypress Creek project. Thank you for having me out. I'm going to cover a few of the things that Mark has covered, but at a much higher level. So I'm not going to get very granular. I'm happy to take questions as we move along. My name is Charlie Flatten. I'm the general manager at the Hayes Trinity Groundwater Conservation District. I'm allergic to podiums and standing still, so if I step out of the frame, that's just the way it's going to be. I'll be back in a minute. Let's do a check. Everybody who's here, please raise your hand. Okay, good. Can I see a show of hands for the folks who have a well that their house depends on for water? Pretty much the whole room. That's good. And is everybody else in the general neighborhood where they probably get their well water or their household water from a utility that gets their water from their wells? So, whenever I'm talking to folks in Western Hayes County, everybody uses groundwater. There aren't very many people who rely on surface water for their primary source. Groundwater is really an interesting resource because it's a shared common resource and it's a shared common property right. It may be one of the only property rights that everybody shares together. Usually when you think of your property right, you think of your ability to mow your grass whenever you want to, or things like that. But we all share the common groundwater and we all consider it a property right. So the balance for the groundwater district is protecting one person's groundwater right versus another groundwater right. And it's a tightrope that we walk every day. Anybody know where this is? Well, it's a beautiful photograph. I'll thank David Baker for it. I think I cribbed it on him. Let's talk about general groundwater. Let's talk about the district. Let's talk about where the water comes from, where it goes, how we use it. Let's talk about the function of the district, and let's talk about the general state of the groundwater today.
Nope. There we go.
Did I mention this beautiful photograph? Thank you, David Baker.
I like that today.
So the groundwater district currently is, if you look outside and you see the relatively beautiful Irish spring that we've had with lots of mists, and the trees are very happy and the flowers are very happy, soils are very happy. We're coming off of, and we're still in the depths of a very severe drought. The ground is like a dried up sponge, and all of the rain that we've been getting is slowly getting that sponge more and more filled up. Until that sponge really gets filled up, we're not going to get any recharge from the rain that's falling. In the best of times, we can anticipate that of all of the rain that falls in the hill country, only about 5% of it actually makes it down into the aquifers. If it hasn't rained in a long time, all of the rain that hits the ground gets soaked up by the trees and the soil, and so we don't get any recharge when we're in drought. So though we look outside and the ground's moist and the trees are happy, we're not really seeing any increases in the aquifer levels from our pretty broad monitor well system. Here's where we were in 2011. This is a drought map of the state. You all remember it was dire. I see one audience member in the back is not going to remember that. Yeah, but that's where we were. This is where we are as of yesterday. This map is put out it's on the Texas Water Development Board's website. You can go to it. It's called the Water Weekly. We are in the very unfortunate position of being right in the middle of the terrible donut hole of drought in the state. Usually this time of year, in a normal year, we would not have very much dark brown on the map. The district is currently in its highest level of drought. We've never been in the highest level of drought in the entire history of the groundwater district. We went into it early last year. We remain in it. If you're in the general confines of the district, we're requiring 40% curtailment in your use, and in the Jacobs Well zone where we are right now, we're requiring a 30% cutback. You might ask why Jacobs Well folks don't have to cut back as much. It's a different scale, and it is a cutback from historic use rather than from permitted use. So it's actually a much deeper cut, and we're seeing much more savings from this type of drought curtailment. So we're here. Let's talk a little bit about rocks. This is This is the geologic column. We're at the top right now. But actually, most of that's been eroded away. We're sitting right about here, the top. And so everything below us is what holds the water that falls and enters the aquifer system. So Marcus, how's that for high level? But you understand? I'll teach the first session. All of the rocks were formed a long time ago. I'm gonna rush through this because we're running out of time. When Central Texas was covered by a vast inland sea, shallow, a lot of marine life, a lot of sediments washing down. We've got really nice, fairly flat layers of limestone that over the eons and millennia, the water that has fallen down there has eroded out and created these really nice containers. It's our infrastructure. It is the infrastructure that holds our water that we rely on for clean, safe drinking water. Here's what the aquifers look like across the state. The Trinity Aquifer, from where most of us get our water, is this sort of pinkish color. It goes all the way up, it goes all the way up into Arkansas. But for what we're talking about, it's most of the hill country, all the way out to, let's say, Fredericksburg and Kerrville. Then we start to get into some Edwards Rock. But for the most part, everywhere west of here in the hill country, we rely on the same water source. Here's a pretty good map of it. The brown is Edwards Rock, and the middle part is the Trinity Aquifer. And these are the general flow paths. We see mostly a southeastern flow path of the groundwater. Then when it hits the I-35 corridor and I-10 or really Highway 90 corridor, we start to see some movement up. But so the water that's underneath the ground is generally flowing, and it's flowing pretty slowly. But unlike most of the other aquifers, the sand aquifers to the east of us, that water is pretty static. It doesn't really move very much. So we've got some flow paths that we need to think about. Part of the district's function is to do the necessary data gathering and science so we can figure out where the water is going, where it's coming from. And that's one of our jobs. Here's a good cross section. I won't dwell on this because Marcus's slides were much more thorough earlier, but basically what we have is rainfall in the uplands. It recharges the aquifer and flows downhill, and then we drill our wells and pump water out. Groundwater districts. I'm going to ask a question. It's a style question. This is a new presentation for this class, and I went with the bubble background. I'm not fond of it now that I see it. Unless anybody's really attached to it, the next time you see this presentation, it's not going to be the bubble. All groundwater districts in the state of Texas were created by the legislature. And most of them have been created in the last 50 years. And that's because prior to 50 years ago or so, there really weren't enough people in the state to create concern that we're going to use up all of our groundwater. There was enough for everybody. Nobody really had to worry about it. Somewhere on the order of 1,000 people a day move to Texas, and none of them are bringing their own water. So what that means is all of the water that we have is the same amount of water that we had 50 or 100 years ago. We just have to share it with a lot more people. What that means is we've got to be much more careful with it, and we have to manage it more completely. The way the state likes for groundwater to be managed is through groundwater districts. They created the state water code, which is called Chapter 36 of the Texas Administrative Code. And that is all of the tools that can be used to manage and regulate groundwater. Every district in the state, there's about 100 of them, was created by the legislature, and each one has its own enabling legislation. That's really where the rubber meets the road. The legislature decides which tools out of the Chapter 36 toolbox individual districts may utilize. So some districts have all of the authority that Chapter 36 authorizes, and they're over here, and they're usually funded by ad valorem taxes, and they have a lot of authority to regulate a lot of wells, including non-exempt wells and exempt wells. And then on the other end of the spectrum are the newer districts like the Hayes Trinity district, where the legislature chose not to give us very many tools. So our toolbox is pretty light. We have probably the poorest funding mechanism of any groundwater district in the state. We have less regulatory authority than most of the groundwater districts in the state. We're doing the best job that we can. We've got a really robust monitoring system. So really the regulatory side is has less emphasis than maybe some other more powerful districts. But the cajoling and education part of our function is more highly emphasized. We come out and talk to people and win hearts and minds rather than hammer them with a regulatory handle. Our district toolbox doesn't have everything that we need, but we're doing the best that we can, and I think we've done a really good job over the past 20 years or so. Yes, ma'am.
What's the difference between exempt and non-exempt?
Sure, that's a good question. And that's generally the same across the state. An exempt well is almost always a domestic well for your home. And if you have some chickens and cattle and horses that you're feeding, then that is part of that non-exempt, that exempt well. Hayes County, Western Hayes County, our district, the legislature saw fit to exempt agriculture irrigation. So we're the only district in the state that does not get to have any regulatory authority over agricultural irrigation. Luckily, we don't have very much. We've got some hay fields. We've got some, we've got some olive orchards and some vineyards, but for the most part, we don't have the big irrigated agriculture that they have elsewhere in the state.
So non-exempt.
Non-exempt is really almost every other commercial use. You've got a restaurant, if you're a utility, if you have a B&B, any use that you're making money off of groundwater, then you're non-exempt and you're required to get a permit through the district.
There's about 33 public water supply companies.
That's about right. Yeah.
One fact is that of the 6,000 wells, 98% of the wells in the district are exempt. They're domestic wells. But that 2% pumps, the trade rate pumps 50% of the water. So that's
Because folks like Aqua Texas and Wimberley Water Supply Corporation and the Dripping Springs Water Supply Corporation, they've got a lot of customers, and most of their water, all of the water down here comes from their big commercial water. So that's the difference between the two. And it's an important distinction. Yes.
You're saying that the Hayes Trinity district doesn't have as many tools in its toolbox, and this is a function of the administrative code. How can we influence that?
Well, if you can influence your legislators, that is the first step. I would actually say probably the first step would be your county commissioners. They understand the problem. They're sympathetic. They're mostly good folks. But until you can not just convince your specific legislature, but the other legislators who are going to be voting for this, in this regulatory climate that exists in the state of Texas, it's going to be a pretty tough sell. But I would encourage anybody who's concerned about this to go talk to their legislators and help them understand that it's important for the common pool to be conserved as much as possible. All the way in the back.
Not much of a question. HB 2127 is something that everybody, if you care about this, please read that bill and start writing your legislators now, because it will begin to limit your power even further. And it's a really messy, large thing that you can get lost in it, but basically one of the main functions is limiting local control over water quality. And it would basically wipe out the tree ordinances that we've recently tried to put in place, which impact water quality as well. So yeah, if you care about being an activist, read about that bill, consider writing to ask your legislators to vote it down.
Thank you for that. I will circle back around to the legislative end of what we do towards the end of the program. And if I don't, please remind me. You have the book.
2127.
2127.
I can definitely verify, but
There are always a number of bills in the legislature that are looking to decrease the the power of groundwater districts to conserve the product. That's always gonna happen, and generally they fail, but you do have to be vigilant, and you do have to contact your local legislators to let them know how you feel as a constituency. Yes, sir.
So are you saying basically this logjam we have against opening up your toolbox is primarily because of lobbying by developers?
That's what you said.
Yeah.
I can neither confirm nor deny the truth of that statement. Yeah. All right, let's move along. Let's see. So the way we operate at our district is gathering good data. That way we can make sturdy science, and that makes really good policy. So if we create policy that doesn't have any data or science backup, we're going to get some pushback, and it's probably not going to be legally durable. Our efforts are always going to be science-based. We're going, if we ever change a rule or increase what we do or decrease what we do, it's going to be based on some scientific background from which we develop through data gathering. We do a lot of data management. We register all the wells in the county. We count the number of utility connections. We have a really good array of monitor wells. Here is the map of those. We've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 monitor wells across the district that we use to measure the depth of the groundwater over time and whatever change in water quality happens to them. And side note is during drought, they all go down, and usually they never come back up to where they were before that. So we've got an ever diminishing quantity of water that we're managing. We monitor spring flow. We monitor water quality. Basically what this is it's a mass balance equation. What's coming in and what's coming out. If you don't know what that is, then you can't manage anything. So this is our general broad scope of what we're trying to do. Where's it coming from? Where's it going? We do a lot of science. Here's the stratigraphic column that Robin pointed out. It's on this handout that's available to everyone if you haven't already picked it up. All of this is available on our website. We've got a really good research page. We've got good data that everybody's welcome to access. We map springs. We map karst features. That is the swallets that Marcus was talking about, any sort of sinkholes, anywhere where there could possibly be some interaction between the surface and the rain and the aquifer beneath. Stratigraphy, depletion zones. I would say a depletion zone is something like municipal centers where you really have a lot of use drawing on a similar package of wells. We do a lot of sampling and testing. We develop flow path and rate charts, and we spend a lot of time thinking about groundwater and surface water interaction. The groundwater is really clean, thankfully. With the groundwater that we have really clean. That's because we do a lot of work protecting what happens on the surface so that when it does go into the ground, it's not leaden with whatever pollution might be on the surface of the water. So be very careful about what you pour onto the ground or allow to leak out of whatever happens, or your septic systems. Make sure those are very clean, because what's going into the aquifer is coming from the surface, and so you can do the math on that. This is our science program. The way we protect the aquifer is through two ways. One is through water quality, and one is through water quantity. We protect the quantity aquifer by doing all of the permitting that we can. If you've got a commercial enterprise and you need to use groundwater, then you must get a permit for that. If you don't want to use groundwater, you're welcome to haul water from some other source or set up a rainwater system. There are other places to get water. In the southern part of the county, we don't really have access to any surface water or what I call exotic water from east of here in the Carrizo Wilcox that many of your legislators will say is a bottomless pit of water. There are lots of pipelines that are coming out of that aquifer that are benefiting the city of San Antonio, the city of San Marcos, and the city of Kyle, and those folks. We don't have access to any of that water. It's very expensive. It will be very expensive if we try to get it up here. We protect quantity of water through permitting, through rules and law that we discussed earlier, through drought management. We're currently in the highest stage of drought that we've ever been in. We've been there for a while, and I think we're probably going to be there for a while longer. Ideally, what we would need is something like a Hurricane Harvey to come up and park itself over Gillespie County and Blanco County and just rain for, I don't know, 6 months. That would be great. Up into, but not including flooding in the river basins. We work a lot to prevent waste. We work on pollution and potential pollution. The Kinder Morgan pipeline came through. Had it not been for the county commissioners and the groundwater district, I don't think anybody probably would have known it was happening. There was no public information on any website that gave a map of where it was going or that it really anything was happening. The groundwater district and the county and the Watershed Association did a really good job of alerting the public to what was happening, and that created a situation where Kinder Morgan had to tighten up their program and put some assurances in effect that this would not be a threat to the aquifer. We're still not sure of that, but it's a lot better than it would have been had nobody been paying attention. There are other situations like that. That's just the latest one that I can think of. We also give the public access to long-range water planning on a statewide level or on a regional level. We do a lot of work on the district has representatives that go to these 50 and 60-year outlook regional planning processes. It's called a state water plan. There's a new one every 5 years. A lot of work goes into making sure that the new data and information that they'll need to project long-range water needs and demands and uses are given to that process so that we can have an idea about where we're going to be in 50 or 60 years. There's a similar one for groundwater, and there's a similar one for flood planning as well. So the groundwater district gives everybody in the room some say as to what they want their future water resources to look like. And that's through the state water plan and through the work that we do in that planning process. We do a lot of information and outreach. We do all kinds of panels and presentations. BMPs, that's called the best management practice. So we have a lot of information on our website as to how to conserve water, what kind of plants you should not be growing on your property and what kind are best to grow on your property. Rainwater harvesting would be a sustainable water supply for everybody that has a big enough yard for a large enough tank. We've got information on that. Alternate supplies, we spoke a little bit about that earlier. Contamination alerts, drilling data. If you need to drill a well or if your well goes wrong on you and you need help with how to deal with that, we've got information on where the best place to drill would be, how deep to go, or if you've got a well that you don't know anything about, there's a good chance that we've got information at the district that details your well specifically, when it was drilled, who drilled it, into what formation it's drilled into. We also have a filing cabinet that's about this long, about that tall, full of state well reports that we call orphan well reports, and they say something like, this well was drilled 6 miles east of Wimberley by the tree. So we don't have any idea really what well.
The big tree or the little tree?
Big tree, right, between the big tree and the little tree. So
Next to a rock.
we don't have a complete list of every single well drilled in the district, but we're working towards that. And whenever we find a new well, we try to get it registered. So if you have wells on your property that are not registered, please register them. It really helps us gather data and paint a bigger picture, a complete picture of what water is being used and how. If you have a well that's not being used, we still would like to know about it. It could be useful for us in monitoring, and we really welcome the idea that we could find a well into a specific formation that we need more data on. That really helps us plan for the whole conservation district. Our last big meeting was a town hall drought. We had a variety of speakers. And it was a big success. 107 neighbors plus beer equals lively Q&A. We have a water wise speaker series. Some of you in this room have spoken at it before. We do it quarterly at board meetings. First 30 minutes of the board meeting once every quarter is an expert that will talk about specifics. This year we had Jeff Watson from the Edwards Aquifer District describe their new groundwater modeling tool. Next week or the next meeting, Dr. Gary will be talking about the Jacobs Well Groundwater Management Zone. We'll have a lecture by Andy Glusenkamp, who I believe lives here in Wimberley, about the creatures that live in the deep aquifers beneath us. And then we'll have a presentation on what do all these fossils mean that we find all over.
Andy's a doctor also.
Dr. Glusenkamp. Correct. Infinitely amusing and entertaining. I highly recommend that you all show up for that. If you can't, these all appear on our website as a film later on. Quarterly speakers plus board meetings equals lively Q&A. We talked about this. I can feel a lot of this.
No, I'm just kidding. I keep getting closer.
Sidling up on me there. 127 neighbors plus Wimberley equals lively Q&A. We have a really broad array of relationships. It's important that the district be on first name, first call basis with the Hays County Commissioners Board, the neighborhood GCDs, the Texas Commission for Environmental Quality, the Texas Water Development Board. Those are the two main state agencies that have some effect on how we use water and where we use water. TCEQ is mostly about quality. The Water Development Board is mostly about quantity and science. Our local municipalities, our local utilities, non-governmental organizations, we have a lot of contact with folks that are really helping the long-term sustainability of groundwater, basically free of charge on their own because they care. Many of you are with them. I forgot to mention parks. They're important. The legislature, we're down there during session, promoting good bills and opposing bad bills. That will be your only opportunity to see me in a tie and a suit. We have good relationships with the well drillers and of course all of the well owners. Anytime you have a problem with your well, please feel free to call the district. We're happy to talk to you about specific fixes if they're available to your problem, or if you just have general questions, we can direct you to the right people. So really, Marcus did a pretty good job of talking about tools that are specific tools that districts have. We've got a few. We've got our rules. We've got our regulations. Probably the best example of the tools that work recently were sort of born out of the Cypress Creek project, and that is the Jacobs Well Groundwater Management Zone, the implementation of that. There's a variety of things. There's a step process that we have to go through when we're making a tool work. In this case, the implementation and creation of the Jacobs Well Groundwater Management Zone. We need to have a need. What is the need? The need in the general public's opinion was we need to have flowing water going through the village of Wimberley. It needs to be clean and it needs to be flowing as much as possible, drought notwithstanding. So we have plants and animals and humans that depend on this flowing water to go through. We have plants and animals and humans that depend on water in their well. How do we manage that so that it lasts as long as possible? That's the need. There it is right there. Then we got to come up with a plan. Well, what's the plan look like? Well, we develop a plan for this process. Then we start to gather data. We need as much data as possible because we're going to develop research, and we have really, maybe in the state, the best group of hydrogeologists of which Marcus is included, that generously donate their time and expertise in developing research based on the data that we've all gathered across the board. We've got stakeholders. You got to get the stakeholders involved. They have opinions. When we were doing the Jacobsville Groundwater Management Plan, the zone plan, we had stakeholders all the way from the general public to utility directors, to mayors, to commissioners, legislators. Everybody got together and hammered out what they needed to see, and that resulted in a compromise. When you get your compromise, everybody's going to get exactly what they want. Everybody's going to get some of what they want, and we've all agreed that this is an acceptable way to move forward. We create a new set of rules. In the case of the Jacobsville Groundwater Management Zone, it's Rule 15. If you want to know exactly what you need to do, if you want to do any kind of commercial enterprise in the Jacobsville Groundwater Management Zone, please visit our website, read Rule 15, and tells you explicitly how to go about doing that. And then we have the education process where we tell everybody what we've done. Most of you have in your hand this flyer that gives a really, thank you, Robin, that gives a really detailed account of what it's all about, why we're doing it, what you can expect from it, and exactly what kind of well you can drill on your property for whatever it is that you need it for. And then we've arrived at some form of common goal. It's not perfect, but it is for the common good, and most people are happy with it. And we think that we've succeeded in this, and but it's still work in process. This is an example of one of the tools that we have at our disposal. We have many. I thought I'd focus on this one because it really directly pertains to this specific project and most of the folks in this room, and some of you participated in that, and I'll thank you right now because it's a long, hard process. And I always end with this slide. We have a finite amount of water. We can always think about bringing new water in, but the cheapest water is the water that we already have. So let's use that as conservatively as possible. That way we don't have to spend millions and billions of dollars getting exotic water into the district. I think that's it. Question?
This is probably dumb, but I haven't been here that long. What is the connection between the Trinity and Edwards?
Sure.
They hook together, or?
Well, kind of. The Trinity Aquifer is older, so it's lower on the scale. Nice. And the Edwards Aquifer rocks are above that. They were laid down later, 65 million years ago versus 100 to 120 million years ago. The relationship is not so much a vertical movement of water. It more is a relationship of when you have the faulting, a lot of the water that is going down to the east hits that fault, then recharges the Edwards Aquifer. Okay, so it's very interesting. Here's an interesting fact to me is that the water that flows down the Blanco pops up on top, and then it goes back down into the Trinity and comes back up, flows on top, and then pops back down, and then it comes out of Jacob's Well, and then it flows down Cypress Creek, rejoins the Blanco River, does its thing a few more times. When it hits that fault zone, it goes into the Edwards Aquifer. And if it's in high drought situations, a lot of that water, most of that water shows up in San Marcos Springs, Barton Springs, and under normal hydrologic conditions, that water comes out in San Marcos Springs. So there's a very complicated, complex set of preferential flow paths underground. It's all connected to some degree, and really the major union between the Edwards and the Trinity is not vertical, it's more along the fault lines, horizontal. And so
Yeah, choice and drilling the well, this community and Trinity.
a brass tacks question. Yes,
The answer to that is it depends.
it's exactly.
Always.
Always.
There are lots of questions in that, so it's really specific to the well, location and the availability.
And also the regulatory process. There are some places you simply can't get a permit to drill into the Edwards Aquifer. I can tell you that if you drill a well in western Hayes County out by Henley, and you hit a beautiful spot of water, That's fantastic. And then if you think, so another well, 100 yards from here, you might hit a duster and not get anything. So there's no real continuity. Things are very different.
You're being replaced, Charlie.
I get you about it. I saw one more question in the back. Yes.
Yes, I want to thank you for this information as a citizen, because I am very concerned. I have attended the water district meetings, and I've heard reports that many people about are that during this drought, is a combination of the drought and developers coming into Western Hayes. I understand from houses that are going to be built up around Northwood Creek. And I want to know what I can do as a citizen to possibly increase your regulatory authority. What can I do for you to have more tools in your toolbox so you can continue to protect our office?
That's a good question. Thank you for asking that. I would like to first roll out the regulatory blanket for the groundwater district and say that we have no authority to keep people from moving anywhere in the county. We have no authority to stop individual homeowners who want to drill an exempt well from doing that. That is happening. We have no authority to tell a business that they can't apply for a permit and grant them a permit during normal circumstances. Now, right now, we have the authority to say we're in this extreme bracket of drought and we are not taking any permits and we're not allowing any commercial wells to be drilled. So we have temporary moratorium authority, but in the long range, we do not have any growth impediment authority. And no groundwater district does. So if that's what you're looking for, I think you're probably going to have to go to the Supreme Court for that. But in terms of making our regulatory authority more robust, or our neighbors in Comal County, or our neighbors in Bear County, or in the case of Williamson County, where they've got no groundwater district, it's the Wild West up there, and they're going to pay for it sooner than everybody else will. You've got to get engaged with your commissioner's court and through them, or not through them, directly with the legislature, starting with your local folks. And then whatever charm you can lend to the rest of the legislature.
Yeah, one thing I've really learned a lot about attending the water district meetings is the legislative process that's necessary. And you and the lawyer for our water district are attending the legislature and speaking towards the better legislation. I really encourage this dedicated group of people who are in this room today to attend the water district meetings. The next one, I think, in May will be in Wimberley. Because if we as citizens can support where you divide the difference between the bad legislation and the good legislation, is that on the website to keep us informed as to what we can do to contact our legislators?
Though we are a political product, we have to be very careful to maintain an apolitical stance with regards to what we're advocating for. So I can say that the Texas Living Waters Project.com, probably maybe .org, they do a pretty good job of maintaining a list of on the balance good versus bad water legislation, groundwater and surface water. That's a good question. I'm going to do a little bit of digging and see if I can find a good resource for just to educate. The Hill Country Alliance probably has a good website and a good page for current legislation. They're really good at that sort of thing.
All right, I'm gonna cut you off.
Okay. Thank you very much.
We do have the room until 2 o'clock, so hopefully we can stick around and you guys can ask questions of the experts and we can look at well water and things like that together. I want to shift focus now from the big picture to what you have in your backyard or your side yard or your front yard. Something that looks like this. This is really sexy, isn't it? Yeah, this does not photograph well. This is what a wellhead looks like. And so we're gonna dive into this and talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts that go into this, and hopefully give you guys some tips and tricks, because I started at the groundwater district at the height of the 2009 drought. And I worked there for 11 years, and now I work with the Watershed Association. But back when I started, it was, how do we get people, individuals, to cut back their water use? And to do that, you've really got to understand how your well works. So we're going to talk about that. This is a well servicing company here that has just pulled out the supply tube and the pump from a well that has now been converted into one of the Hayes Trinity monitoring sites. This is on Coleman's Canyon, which is just up dip from Jacob's Well. This is the recharge zone for the Jacob's Well spring shed. And it's an important data point because this well is completed in that same segment of aquifer that you saw the diver swimming through. This pump would have pumped water out of exactly that same layer of rock. I just have to do some disclaimers and some acknowledgements, and I think this was mentioned before. We have an incredible group of people here that are way smarter than I am, my husband included. These guys have the hydrogeologists, the geologists, the hydrologists, the creative well servicers and well drillers have informed the information that we have so vastly that it is a privilege to stand on those shoulders of giants. There are a lot of them. Full disclosure, I'm a geographer. I love to speak through maps. And it's tricky to show what's happening underground on a map when you have to go through a 3/4 inch hole.
Half inch.
See? Half-inch hole with a tiny little E-line to go get your water level. They're doing science through a hole like this. It's incredible stuff. It is an art. It requires skill and creativity and tenacity. They're working out in really tough Texas conditions. And they do it because of their love for the science. They love this area. They love the water resources. They're inspired by the people surrounding these areas. And I'm just really excited to be part of this community. It's a really good group to get to call colleagues. So how your well works, we're just going to focus on this guy. There's a borehole that they drill when they drill your well. And sometimes they put some casing down the hole to isolate it from undesirable layers. Marcus rattled off a whole bunch of creative names of different layers of rock that make up the Trinity Aquifer around here. So they can put packers and say, no, I don't want to draw water from this area. Or yes, let's draw as much of water from this area that we can. Your pump is hung down at the very, well, actually not at the very, very bottom of your well, because otherwise you might collect some of the sediment that the well might slough off with time. Wells can be young, obviously, they can be just drilled, or they can be years and years and years and years and years old. They can be 50, 60 years old. And over time, that erosion to the well, to the borehole can cause sloughing. So if your pump is sitting down in the sediment, you might be sucking up some of the sediment that comes off the wall, the rock walls of your well. Your pump is hung from the top of this well casing, or this well head, with 4 bolts that hold it all the way down here. Sweet. These these bolts right here hold the entire weight of that pump, and it is a burly pump. There's a picture of one in here. It's about this long, and it is made of really tough metal with a motor on the bottom of it. So this has to be really strong. Don't ever undo these bolts. This little plastic plug is what you would have in your observation port. Some of the drillers and pump servicers put your supply line right over where this little port is. And that makes it so sad, because then we can't get a water level measurement because it's blocked or it's just blocked. Okay, so this is where your water would come out, and this is your control box. And it's pretty heavy, isn't it? There's a sanitary seal here so that there's like a neoprene sleeve that won't allow sediment or contaminants to get in from your wellhead. Were you gonna say something? Thank you, Anna. Okay. So we can tell that there have been more and more wells going in, right? And Charlie mentioned that there's no more new water down there. When it rains, our aquifers do fill up. Those karst features allow water to get down into our aquifer system, which is really actually pretty rare for aquifer systems. The Carrizo Wilcox has recharge rates that are very slow, but our karst aquifers, provided it does rain, can see recharge events. We're seeing the number of wells going in and a downward trend in those peaks. So the peaks are kind of following a downward trend. When we're looking at, let's just say, which well you might want to have, because that was a good question. Which well seems like the best well for you to have? Would you want to have this well next to this well? Probably not. This well looks like when it's pumping, it draws down a bit, right? So here's the non-drought water level. And this well is a shallow well, perhaps just a neighbor right across the fence. Shallower well, deeper well. This one has more access to rock that has a larger volume of water there. And it could be equipped with a larger pump that creates a large cone of depression that could influence the neighbor, right? So while it's underground and it's hard to see through that half-inch hole, we can tell that there is influence from one well to the next. And your well construction matters, just like Marcus had mentioned. Knowing how deep your well is, where your water level is, and where your pump is hung can really give you a lot more confidence of what's happening in there. A lot of us are, if we don't know that kind of information, it's kind of like driving your car or your truck or your SUV with no gas gauge, right? Charlie's monitor well network really serves to provide a gas gauge for all the neighbors around, so that you don't specifically have to monitor your well, but you can see what's happening in the trends around you. And that's data that's accessible readily on the website. If you don't know how your well is constructed, you can go to one place that you can go is the Texas Water Development Board. And back in 2003, the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, same guys that inspect all the elevators, they keep tabs on all the well drillers. And they said, well driller, you're gonna have to start submitting all your data online and get into the 20th century. And that happened back in 2003. The Water Development Board, with their amazing resources, put together an interface. So at midnight, if you want to go find your well record, you can. This is the Water Data Interactive. Google TWDB, that stands for Texas Water Development Board, TWDB space. Water Data Interactive, so WDI. So that acronym right there is the fastest way to bring you to this map with the purple dots on it. Those purple dots are something that's tied to a groundwater database. And Charlie and Marcus both mentioned the importance of getting water quality data for our aquifers of the state. The data are shared through this interface, and you can click on one of these and it'll bring up the well report. This type of data is, okay. Here's a question. Looking at it, are there more purple dots or more orange dots? I'm going to flash up the orange dots. Orange dots. Okay, so the groundwater database has less points on it, but the submitted drillers reports have more points on it. These orange points are records of well construction. So that's where your data is going to be. It's a little bit mean, but I don't work for the Texas Water Development Board, so it's not my fault. You have to go to the groundwater tab right here and select the submitted drillers reports to get these orange dots to pop up. Just, that's a pro tip. That's on the note there. You can also, I guess the pro tip is that you can use this address bar right here to type in your address. And it'll zoom you right there. You just have to remember to turn on the orange dots. So here's the example. Notice I don't have a live demo. So if you were to click on a dot, it would bring up this pop-up, and it has this hyperlinked number there. That is a well report tracking number. If you have that number, you could also put it in the address bar and zip over to it. It's a handy tool for if you're tracking a bunch of different wells. If you click on this hyperlink, you get the state well report. It looks really exciting, right? It has some interesting information. It doesn't translate well to this screen, obviously, but I can tell you that this well, which has been blurred out of recognition. This is the Barton Springs District's recently drilled dual completion well at Jacobs Well Natural Area. It is 250 feet deep. That's what the well report tells me. It was drilled in April of last year. There's no water level data. There's no pump in it, and there was no well tests done, but there's a description of the rock layers that they encountered as they were drilling down. And now, to me, this description doesn't help me. Geographer, not a geologist, but I know a geologist, and he would be able to tell that when you get to the gray limestone with white reef, that's an exciting layer right there. And that, based on the depth of the water and the known surface geology, a skilled geologist would be able to tell you what rock layer with fancy names that were previously mentioned and are available on that strat column would be where this well is completed. So it's really useful information, but sometimes it's not really intuitive to a homeowner where your well is completed, right? But you can call Charlie, or Radu can actually, if you have this information, you give them your tracking number, they'd easily be able to pull it up.
Robert. I will just let you all know that when you rush home and get this website up and click on, you type in your address. If there's nothing there, please register your well. Thank you.
Okay, looking at another well that was recently drilled. This is one of the two aquifer or test wells that Aqua Texas recently put in. And we can see from the well report that this was a 440-foot deep well drilled in September of last year. And here the geologists have put Upper Glen Rose, Lower Glen Rose, Hensel, Cow Creek, where the dude was scuba diving, and the Hammett Clay, that confining layer. So they've gone through and done the interpretation. This is a lot easier for me and probably for most homeowners, but this is a rare case. We can tell with this is the driller's interpretation of what they've encountered, and they've probably drilled a lot more wells than I have. And probably have a much better idea of where those interfaces are. And this tracks to, I said I was a map maker. We have Jacobs Well Spring here and Pleasant Valley Spring here, both of which were talked about in previous discussions. We have an outcrop of the lower Glen Rose, which is part of the Middle Trinity Aquifer. So lower Glen Rose, this is really creative, fancy geologic namings that are just really confusing. So the lower Glen Rose is part of the Middle Trinity Aquifer. In these dark gray or dark green sections. And that is where water can very easily go into the Middle Trinity Aquifer. You see that dry Cypress is all up around in here, and there's a lot of known karst features there. So when it rains, that's where the water goes back down into the aquifer and we see the recharge. But we also see there's a number of wells. All these dots are wells, and I've actually symbolized them by yield. Now, yield is how much water you can produce in a given unit of time from that well. And the green dots can produce 0 to 25 gallons per minute. So that's pretty low. That's the grand majority of our wells, right? Along the faults, you can see that there are some darker red dots. Those are wells that can produce over 100 gallons a minute. So you can tell that the geology and the way that these rock layers work and the depth isn't equal across all of them, right? When we went and did, remember the report that Marcus showed with the 2021 potentiometric surface, that fancy water level map report, where I met many of you. We brought out this sheet of paper and I would fold it according to the surface geology. Very, very rough science here, farm science. So I would fold it over to show what parts of the geology had eroded away already. So if we know what the land surface geology is, then we can tell how far down your depth or your well is and get a kind of an idea of where your well is completed. Pretty cool. So there's a little house, the person, the wellhead, and then here's the water level and with your pump and the total depth. So it starts making more sense than just dots on a map. When we were talking about this groundwater workshop, I tried to get a retired pump installer to come. And I begged him, and he said, Robin, it would be really, really, really bad if I came. I don't do public speaking, I fix wells. So I said, okay, I'll be your surrogate if you'll help me come up with some information to share with everybody. So here's some advice from them. There are different well components that work to protect your well system and your investment in that system. The first one is a pump protector, and that's basically a fuse. It gets tripped if the pump works too long. So it's tracking how much energy the pump is pulling. And if it goes on for way too long, it'll cut it off. So it won't let your well or your pump itself dry, because that pump requires the water around it to cool. So if the water level drops below it and it's still saying, I need to pump more water, it's just going to run itself into a frenzy. And then you're going to have a pump all the way down at the bottom, almost all the way down at the bottom of your well that needs to be replaced. That would be sad and expensive. So the pump protectors a good investment. Many wells have these. It's a good thing to look for. A pressure tank. These are these lovely blue tanks that you see very quintessentially sitting out in people's front yards or side yards. They can be old or they can be new. The pressure tank minimizes how many times your pump has to start and stop because it has a diaphragm inside this inside the tank that's charged with air. And just like when you need to take a breath, your diaphragm allows air into your lungs. Well, the diaphragm allows water into the tank. Okay, and it can go for a certain amount of time before it needs to have the pump kick on and refill refill the volume filled by air. For example, a 44-gallon tank, which is a pretty small tank, has 16 gallons before it needs to kick on. So it's not a lot. I mean, you could take a really fast shower, but usually it would kick on if you were taking a shower, but you could flush the toilet maybe 10 times before your pump would need to run. Does that make sense? So it lessens the number of times that your pump has to turn on. A storage tank is even better. A storage tank is usually those big black tanks that sit next to a pump house. And that allows the pump to fill a large volume of water, and then it senses the demand when it drops below a certain volume. This is particularly useful in drought or with low yielding wells. So you're not having to rely on your well to provide the volume for your house. You can use all day to pump water into a tank and then use the volume in the tank to supply your house. Then it gives it a little bit less time, or provides more time for it to recover with the daily use.
It can also be a handy receptacle if your well goes dry for the water haulers to put
Yes.
exotic oil in.
If you
Supply.
exactly. So if you have a storage tank, it makes you more nimble to react to challenges like your well going dry, or your pump failing, or your other part of your distribution having problems. So this is a really smart investment. They usually so a water hauler tank, we've seen a lot of them around. They haul 2,000 gallons at a time. So if you're, thinking about if you were ever going to get exotic water delivered, you'd want to have over 2,000 gallons there. Our house has a 1,000-gallon tank, 1,000 or 1,500 gallon size. I'd like it to be larger, but it's enough to buffer. Our family uses, we were previously not on a well, and generally we would use between 4,000 and 5,000 gallons a month. Family of 4 with a husband that likes to take a lot of showers. and a wife that likes to do a lot of cooking and dishes.
Does the TCEQ like for you to commingle your rainwater harvesting with this tank?
I would not suggest it, but I'm a geographer, as previously stated. A lot of people have, but check with the actual well servicer or a water supply expert on that. I don't think you would want to. Yes. I hear the answer is no. So a water softener is another thing that a lot of people feel like protects their well system, or protects their family's well-being. And actually it doesn't do any filtration. All it does is it takes a calcium ion and replaces it with a sodium or a potassium ion in an ion exchange. And the calcium has a really nasty habit of forming white marks or depositing on fixtures where sodium or potassium stays it stays dissolved in the water a lot better. So it's not a filtration thing, but it can lessen the hardness of your water and reduce the amount of deposits that you would have on your tank. UV light systems and chlorinators are ways to deal with bacteria. UV light does not change the taste of the water, and chlorine does. Both of them can eliminate bacteria from surface water flows.
Come back to the salt, to add to the salt water softener, if you're on a septic system, and salt's going in, and, well, like, is that good for the environment, for the, salt we put down to the office?
Our next workshop is going to be a septic workshop, and you can ask that question there. I don't feel like the volume is really something that, the volume of salt used is something that would create a problem with your drain field or your leach field. But we can ask that.
Probably moved my neighbor's salt bags from her car the other day.
That's a lot of
More
salt.
volume.
All right. So getting into what the well professional said for all of you guys. In general, like general practices, he said, first thing, know where your breaker is. On your breaker panel, there should be a clearly marked area that says well, or you could have a sub panel in your well house to be able to turn that off. If there's a problem and your well is malfunctioning, turn it off. He said, wait an hour, turn it back on, and if it doesn't get fixed, call a well servicer. Sometimes it needs to be reset, or sometimes it just needs that hour to refill. Second thing is know where your main cutoff valve is. So in this well system here, the main cutoff valve is right here. And if you had a flooding situation or a leak that you could not stop, you could turn off the water there to getting to your house and be able to stop it there. It's also really critical in leak detection for your system. He also suggested that every few years, and if you've never had it done, do it now while you're not in a crisis. Have a well servicer come out and check your system. They'll check for leaks. They'll check the pre-charge on your pressure tank. So that pressure tank is working optimally to reduce the number of on-off cycles for your pump. And they can check the status of your components, kind of give you an idea of what is really old and what is just fine and looking good. So it's a good idea. He also commented that pumps have a certain number of starts and stops. And so if you minimize the number of starts and stops that pump has, it'll last longer. And he said, you know, you can have a pump that'll last 20 to 30 years. Here's a picture of a pump that has been pulled just to give you an idea of what's down hanging at the bottom of that pump or that supply line. Leaks are the worst thing for your systems. And in fact, EPA says that 10% of the homes in the United States have leaks that waste 90 gallons or more per day. Now Texas is special. So I don't know how that goes, you know, everything's bigger in Texas or better. I'm not exactly sure how that goes, but there's a good chance that your system has a leak. And so look for one. The most common types of leaks are worn toilet flappers, especially that have calcium drip around them, dripping faucets, and leaking toilets. Oh, sorry, and other leaking valves. I already said toilets. This is unnecessary water use, and it's wear and tear. It's unnecessary wear and tear on your pump and your distribution system. The other thing that people don't think about is that it's wear and tear on your septic system. So you're getting double taxation because of that one leak. If it's an indoor leak, it's making your drain field potentially get more saturated, and it's making all of your septic system components work harder. So fix your leaks. And here's how to do it. Meters make it really easy. All you have to do is not use water and then check the meter. But most domestic wells don't have meters on them. You're not required to report your volume as an exempt well owner, so why put in a meter? Some people are putting in meters just for their own knowledge, and I think that's cool. There are two tricks that you can use that the professional told me about. One is being in touch with your pressure tank. Your pressure tank is loud. And if you hear it cycling when you know there's no water use in your house, there's a leak. Especially if it's a 90 gallon leak over the course of a day. That's a big leak. And that pressure tank has to recharge itself if it's let's see, I wrote it down. No, yes. 44 gallon tank has a 16 gallon threshold, and an 85 gallon, which is the bigger ones, have a 28 gallon threshold before it kicks on the demand from the pump or from your storage tank. So that's a good way to do nothing but understand what's going on in your system. Another one is a cutoff valve trick. And so what you do is you cut off the water to your house and don't use water. Do it for an hour, right? Then after not using water for an hour, go back out to your well house and just barely crack open your cutoff valve so that water has to hiss its way through. And if it goes for a really long time, the volume of water in the pipe downstream of that cutoff valve has leaked out somewhere, right? So there's definitely an indication that you would have a leak. So if it just takes a little tiny bit, no big deal. But if it runs for a while to get that water to come through, then you know you've got a big leak. He also said that if you don't want to lean down, and I don't know if you might not want to put your ear down on the pipe of in your well house, you can get a pipe and put your ear to it and touch the pipe. It'll act like a stethoscope. I was like, oh, it's like an Indian listening to railroad tracks. Same thing. To be able to hear that water running even better. And those leaks, so this is, common leak from a bathroom faucet. And then just for humor, this is a running toilet, if you were wondering. So this is important because there are so many wells out there. This is data recently pulled in March. And the wells, these are all water wells, and they're symbolized based on when the well was drilled. The darker the dot, the more recent the well. This is since 2003, using all that data that's on that one website that I showed you. It's the orange dots, but now I've turned them blue, just to confuse you. And you can tell that there are a lot of people that are reliant on wells for their water supply. So we've got to be better stewards and know how to work our wells better and how to take care of them. Ooh, sorry. Because those wells are tied to our springs. And here's a look at Jacob's Well in April of 2021, and then what it looked like since October of last year. So it's important, right? We've all got to be able to do our part. Denver had a really successful campaign that was called Use Only What You Need. And I thought it was really demonstrative to show you, this is how much water, those are 55 gallon drums stacked on each other. That would be how much water is wasted by a running toilet in 3 months. As a visual, right? It's pretty cool. They get better. And then this is how much, the little blurb says how much water you give your lawn and how much it actually needs, the smaller one. And this one says grass is dumb, water less, it won't notice. Broken sprinklers waste water. That one was pretty creative. How much water you give your lawn on the left-hand side and how much it really needs. conserved. This is like texting before texting, right? Use only what you need. They took out all the letters you didn't need. Yeah, okay. It's just funny. Yes. Camels of the plant world, Texas natives, right? Not in Colorado, but our camels of the plant world are our Texas natives because they're prepared for the drought and flood cycles of Texas. Oops, I go back one. There we go. So there was a great question on how can you help? You can maintain a leak-free home and use only what you need. You can switch to alternate supplies for non-potable uses. A lot of the One Water efforts that are going on now, like the library, like Patsy Glen Refuge with the rainwater harvesting, like Blue Hole Primary, like Blue Hole Regional Park. So many of those successes that have been encouraged through the Cypress Creek Watershed Protection Plan are ways that we can really leverage non-potable or leverage site harvested supply for our non-potable uses. Embrace the look and feel of the hill country. Those native plants, the camels of the plant world, are adapted to live here. And then support and encourage conservation efforts. The Hayes Trinity GCD, all the GCDs, EAA needs help, Barton Springs District needs help. Make it a kitchen table conversation or make it a driveway conversation with your neighbors when we're in drought so that other people get around. They can say it, but you guys can say it more effectively to your neighbors. Although Charlie's pretty effective. And then support legislative policy efforts that protect land and water resources. A few of them are the Texas Land and Conservation Fund. This is currently active in the Texas legislature, and this would create a fund for Texas to invest in land conservation to protect water. It'd be amazing. It would be like an endowment that it's started by pulling some of the money from the rainy day fund and then using that to fund private and public land conservation efforts that have ecosystem benefits. The pristine streams protections, that's in the TCEQ right now. They're going through some rulemaking that's stalled. We need to push that one a little bit faster. And then for the Hayes Trinity folks, that there's going to be a decision and a stakeholder process to look at that regional recharge study area that really does influence water in our area and downstream towards the Edwards Aquifer. Those are just a few of them, but I gave a sampling, and that's it.
Well, thank you, Robin and Marcus and Charlie and just everybody for showing up. I know we're running over our time, but I'm happy to, if you've got any questions or any comments, happy to take just a couple of minutes to do that. If you need to leave, I understand since we're over. Jenna, thank you. And let's give it to Des for keeping. That's winter. It's always good. Yeah.
David, this is one of the things I wrote down. What's the agencies and stuff, what's their read on the outlook for this year, the weather, the rain, what are we in?
Yeah, we're still gonna be in El Nino cycle, it looks like through the summer, and El Nino, I should say, La Nina. Because it looks like another dry summer, unfortunately. Maybe some rain in the fall, but probably not a full shift over until the first of next year. Is that what you guys are understanding?
Keep pushing it back. So
Yeah. We're gonna be
buckle down for the summer.
It's
Don't plan any swimming parties if you're out.
it's gonna be a rough one. And I think you guys, this was a great overview. I think you guys are seeing. I always use kind of the metaphor of the bank account. It's like a bank account that keeps spending as we're pumping more and we're not getting as much deposits from recharge. So we see those declining water levels all over. And, you know, you think it, when you look at Jacob's Well, that is the aquifer on the surface. It's, you know, Jack Sharp said, well, I said, where's our J17 well that the Edwards uses to go into different shades of stages of drought? He said, that's it. That is the aquifer. And when that gets low, that means water levels all over are lowering. But the problem is we still have thousands of lots that are undeveloped and Wood Creek. Roberta, you mentioned the next groundwater district meeting. I think something, a big issue that's going to come up there is that Aqua Texas overpumped their permit by 175 acre feet. Massive amount. That notice of violation will be on the agenda at the next meeting. I think it'll be important to have a lot of community members show up for, to that. We are trying to work with Aqua. We're drilling wells out. They've drilled some wells outside of the management zone. We've designed a pump test. We spoke in support of a variance for them to do that aquifer test. We want to try to get that pumping out of that management zone. That's our goal, to get it down dip. But ultimately, I'm afraid we've kind of fallen off the cliff already, and we don't know how bad it's going to hurt when we hit. We really can't keep tapping more and more water. We've got to figure out how to get by with less water. And Robin gave some great ideas for how to do that. Rainwater is a great strategy, native plants, but this acute pumping that we're seeing in the upper watershed is a dilemma. It is a huge existential threat to this valley.
And the price of delivered water.
Oh, yeah, you know.
It went up $50. I mean, I have to have brought to one of my houses, because the well is not good, and it just went from 250 to 300.
Yeah.
Or 2,000 gallons.
Wait till you get the bill for the I-35 pipeline connection up.
Yeah, there are plans, you know, in the state water plan to bring water lines out here from the Crizo, but you're talking probably 5 times the amount of money that you're paying for water, even now with Aqua's rates, which are super high. And we don't think that's a great idea, because we go to Dripping Springs or go to Bee Cave and look at that. That's what will happen when you get imported water. Yeah, in the
I
back.
have 2 questions. One, where is that Pleasant Valley Spring located? Like, what neighborhood is that?
It's on private land. It's about a mile to the west of Fisher Store Road. Is that correct?
It was bridge.
Fisher Store Bridge there across the Blanco. So it's a mile north on private land there. So there is no real public access to that particular
Yeah,
stream.
I was asking for protection measures, not necessarily that go proper over there.
Yeah.
And then my next question was, y'all mentioned that the money was gonna run out for the Cypress Creek protection plan. Are there remaining funds, and are they earmarked, or do y'all already have a plan for?
Yeah, no, and as city council member with Wood Creek, thank you for being here. Yeah. I think the plan, Robin said, our plan is to really talk to the cities, the county, Aqua, the other key stakeholders, and create an interlocal agreement that would fund part of Robin's time as coordinator. We would the watershed would take that over. We monitor 13 sites for the Clean Rivers program. So that would be one element. But I think probably the next step is to get the key stakeholders together, set a new set of goals. We have goals that were the original goals for water quality for the plan, but I think update those. Since it won't be EPA funded, it'll allow us a little more leeway in terms of the things we work on. We won't be restricted by those strict 319 grant money. So we're hoping to get everybody to chip in locally here to fund that going forward. But the watershed is dedicated to keep that plan going, and then partnering with Meadows that Meadows goes out and actually collects the water samples for us and that go to the Clean Rivers program. So we keep that partnership going. But yeah, we're gonna be coming and asking you all for money, is I guess is the short answer. Yes.
we do it, I want to see a headline on the Wimberley View saying developers don't come here. Stay away, and I closed the gate since I'm from Wimberley. And 20 years ago, so it seems to me that the developers come in and they are coming to make a profit. To build something, make a profit, sell it and leave. They don't have an ongoing investment in maintaining our aquifer the way those of us in this room who live here want to maintain their aquifer. So I just don't know how to get the word out to say, there's a limit. If you're telling people you're building houses here, you're telling people, oh, you know, buy this 250,000, 600,000 house. Tell them, can they make developers be honest and say, well, in 2 or 3 more years, your well might run dry.
Yeah,
How can we get the word out that the wells are already running dry or lowering in some places, and people are looking at big expenses that you have in their wells?
yeah. We probably need this meeting like 20x, you know, we need more people to be aware of what we've all learned today. And I think we do have the district. We do have, you know, Wimberley looks like this because Wimberley set pretty strict guidelines when they incorporated back in the day. And that did that, you know, you drive in here, you feel it's different than other parts of Central Texas. And that's intentional. But part of it is just the limitations of the aquifer itself. And the county went from 2 acres to 6 acres for instance, for subdivisions, but the science says we really should be 30 acres, you know, so we got a ways to go. And as Charlie said, it's always kind of a compromise and incremental progress that we're making. But I think this consciousness and awareness is really the #1 thing we're trying to do. The fact that each of our wells in some ways is tied to these waterways, that's just a big realization. And then we can, each time when I turn the water on, you know, just a little bit of gratitude. Thank you. I'm glad that, you know, we kind of take it for granted, but I think just feeling that, you know, I feel it when I walk up and I look at that creek, you feel something, but we need to kind of feel that when we turn that water on. And, you know, it is going to rain again. It's going to fill back up. But if we build another 1,000 houses, and then the next drought in a month, it hits what took us 6 months to get to. That's where this land conservation program, we didn't talk about that today much. Probably should have a whole other session on that, but watershed is protected over 500 acres there around Jacobs Well, working with Hays County. When we started, let's see, Alexander here from the county, Natural Resource Coordinator. When we started in the late 90s, we had 1 15-acre park, Dudley Johnson Park. And we passed now over $100 million in bonds over the last 20 years. There's now 30,000 acres protected in Hays County that when we started with 15. So we've come a long way, but we need to probably protect another 4,000 to 5,000 acres just in this watershed, and certainly in the Blanco watershed. That's the best way for long term for us to protect these resources and protecting those recharge zones. I think probably having a whole other session about that program and how that works would be really, really good. But we each can do our part. And I think, man, I really want to thank all the speakers today, because I think we had a really global overview of how the aquifer works, what the guidelines and the rules and the science around it. And then just the pragmatic aspects of managing your own well. So thank you, presenters. Thank you guys for coming out and come to that next groundwater district meeting. We're going to want, I think, some folks to hear that we want Aqua to try to do a better job with curtailing their.
When is it?
Next meeting, 4th of May. The 4th of May, and then the 5th, come over to the San Marcos Library and celebrate the Sacred Springs with us. Thank you all. All right.